This is Lake Las Vegas. It's a man-made utopia in the middle of the Nevada desert. Today, parts of it feel like a ghost town. Empty storefronts, silent mansions, a massive dream gathering dust. But just over a decade ago, this place was seen as the future. It was a bet that you could build an Italian paradise from scratch, just a short drive from the Las Vegas Strip. The community became so exclusive that it was a retreat for Celine Dion at the height of her Vegas fame. So how did one of America's most ambitious resorts, a playground for the rich and famous, go bankrupt so spectacularly? This is the story of the rise, the fall, and the surprising second act of Lake Las Vegas. It's a story that sounds like an impossible American dream that collapsed into a real empty wasteland. But there's another twist hiding in plain sight. The ruins were bought for pennies on the dollar by a billionaire hedge fund investor, the very kind of person who profits from market crashes. Stick with me, because the story of this place is a wild ride. Our story really begins in the late 1980s. A development team led by a man named Ronald Boydecker stood in the harsh, windswept Nevada desert and saw something that no one else did: an Italian paradise. The vision had been floating around since the 1960s with a different developer, but Boydecker's group had the capital to make it happen. They began building something most people thought was impossible: a massive, artificial 320-acre lake. They envisioned a shimmering blue jewel surrounded by a luxury resort town, an oasis just miles from the chaos of the Strip. To pull this off, they embarked on a monumental feat of engineering. They built an 18-story dam and pumped billions of gallons of water from nearby Lake Mead to painstakingly fill the basin they'd carved out of the dry earth. This wasn't just a pond. It was a 3,600-acre master-planned community built around a private lake with miles of shoreline. It was a bold declaration that with enough money and concrete, you could bend nature to your will. Boydecker and his team weren't just building a lake, they were building a fantasy, betting that they could turn an overlooked patch of desert into one of the most desirable addresses in Nevada. Boydecker's vision was infectious. By 1995, it had captured the imagination of some of the wealthiest people in America. Billionaire investors Sid and Lee Bass, heirs to a Texas oil fortune, and Henry Gluck, the former chairman of Caesars World, saw the project and didn't just see water, they saw a gold mine. Their involvement was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Their capital and influence helped transform Lake Las Vegas from an ambitious idea into a globally recognized luxury destination. With their money, the scale of the ambition grew exponentially. This wasn't just about houses anymore. It was about creating an entire ecosystem of luxury. They brought in legendary golfer Jack Nicklaus to design signature championship golf courses. They broke ground on a magnificent Hyatt Regency, which would later become a Westin. And then came the crown jewel, a palatial 5-star Ritz-Carlton, a name synonymous with opulence. Custom mansions began to rise along the shorelines, and in the early 2000s, the community landed its most famous resident, global superstar Celine Dion, in the midst of her legendary Vegas residency, acquired a multi-million-dollar lakefront home there, cementing the community's status as a true celebrity enclave. Her presence was the ultimate endorsement. For a time, it seemed like the gamble had paid off beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Lake Las Vegas was no longer a vision, it was a vibrant, living reality. It was like walking through a perfect village where every building looked like it was plucked from a postcard of Lake Como. It was a stunningly beautiful resort community, just 20 miles, yet a world away from the relentless energy of the Las Vegas Strip. The world took notice. The Washington Post even named Lake Las Vegas among its 20 hot destinations for 2004, placing it alongside iconic global locations. This wasn't just a place to visit, it was a place to live the good life. The Village at Lake Las Vegas, a charming collection of boutique shops and restaurants, buzzed with residents and tourists. On the water, boats carved white wakes across the deep blue. But underneath the surface, the project was only partially realized. Of the 9,000 residential units that had been planned, only about a third were ever completed before the crash. For a few shining years in the mid-2000s, Lake Las Vegas looked like a triumph, but as with all tales of incredible highs, the fall was just around the corner. The golden age was brilliant, but dangerously brief. As the summer of 2007 drew to a close, the first catastrophic crack appeared in the shimmering facade of Lake Las Vegas. That fall, the developers defaulted on over $500 million in loans. The very foundation of their paradise, which had seemed so solid just months before, was suddenly crumbling. The reason for the default was a toxic cocktail of overambition and a rapidly souring economy. Loan agreements required the developers to sell off undeveloped land to help pay down their debt, but the housing market was starting to freeze. The subprime mortgage crisis was beginning its tailspin, land sales stalled, and the money never materialized. The project officially went into default, and by January 2008, it was sold to new owners, the Adelon Group, who acquired the assets in the wake of the financial collapse. The intricate financial structure that had supported the dream had crumbled under the weight of its own debt and the force of a global financial crisis. The party was over. If the default was a crack, what came next was a full-scale earthquake. Just 6 months after being acquired, the entity managing the resort filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on July 17, 2008. The dream was now legally broken, crushed by a suffocating debt burden estimated between $500 million and a staggering $1 billion. The entire project was now in the hands of lawyers and creditors, its fate to be decided in a sterile courtroom, reduced to assets and liabilities on a balance sheet. To make matters worse, the project's original visionary, Ronald Bodecker, had passed away, and his estate was now tangled in the legal and financial quagmire of his collapsed dream. It's a stark reminder that behind every grand vision, there is a financial reality. For Lake Las Vegas, that reality was a hole so deep it could not climb out. The financial collapse was swift, and the physical decay was just as dramatic. The symbols of its former glory were the first to go. The Jack Nicklaus golf courses were starved of water until their fairways turned to dust, and to save money, the decorative waterfalls cascading down the hillsides were shut off, leaving an eerie silence. Then, in 2010, the magnificent Ritz-Carlton Hotel, the community's crown jewel, shut its doors, the first Ritz-Carlton in history to do so. The effect on residents was devastating. In 2009 alone, banks foreclosed on 124 of the community's 1,700 homes. One former mortgage broker who lost his investment property there said simply, "I thought it was a no-lose situation. It ruined me." The village became a collection of empty storefronts, and headlines were brutal, calling it a wasteland. What was built as a monument to wealth had become a tombstone. The story of how this dream turned into a nightmare is both a warning and a fascinating look at high-stakes real estate. If you're finding this story of boom and bust as compelling as I do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We explore the world's most ambitious projects, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next. For years, the ghost town narrative was the only story, but then something unexpected happened. A new player entered the game, billionaire hedge fund manager John Paulson. In 2012, his firm began to swoop in, acquiring roughly 1,000 acres of the failed development, including much of its core infrastructure, for a reported $17 pennies on the dollar. Slowly but surely, a cautious revival began. Paulson, working with a development manager, began methodically reinvesting tens of millions of dollars. The strategy was different this time. It wasn't about building a flashy resort for tourists, but a sustainable, long-term residential community. The shuttered Ritz-Carlton was rebranded and reopened as a Hilton. The Hyatt became a Westin. Critically, in 2014, the iconic Reflection Bay Golf Club was meticulously restored and reopened, its fairways turning from brown back to a vibrant green. New home builders like Toll Brothers and Pulte were brought in, offering a wider range of housing options beyond just multi-million-dollar mansions. By the mid-2020s, the Ghost Town label was starting to feel like ancient history. The community is still quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet, not an empty one. Today, new home communities are actively selling, and Lake Las Vegas is starting to look green again, both literally and financially. The final turn in this incredible story belongs to the billionaire who saw value where others only saw failure. After hitting absolute rock bottom and becoming a national punchline, Lake Las Vegas found its second act. The original developers and lenders, the ones who had poured hundreds of millions into the initial dream, lost nearly everything. But the new guard, led by a man who understood the cyclical nature of markets, was able to buy, repackage, and rebuild. What this means is that even an American dream that collapses into a ghost town can be resurrected. Under Paulson's ownership, Lake Las Vegas has made real headway. It has shifted from a vacation-only spot to a genuine neighborhood where thousands of people now live full-time. The village is active again with festivals and water sports, and there is a sense of stability that was unimaginable a decade ago. It proves that even the most spectacular failures are not always the end of the story. Sometimes they are just the violent, messy beginning of the next chapter. The story of Lake Las Vegas is a lesson in hubris and financial collapse, but it is also, ultimately, a story of resilience. From an impossible desert dream to a billion-dollar powerhouse, from a celebrity haven to a bankrupt ghost town, and now to a quiet but steady rebirth. The journey of Lake Las Vegas is one of the most dramatic tales in modern American development, a place that has symbolized both extravagant success and catastrophic failure. It's a story that's still being written, with new homes and new residents arriving every year, slowly but surely filling in the empty spaces left behind by the crash. And it leaves us with a fascinating question. Have you ever seen a place in your own life, a failed business, a forgotten neighborhood that seemed destined for ruin, only to watch it, against all odds, start to come back? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.